And you said that day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it's always day 1. Can you explain this day 1 thing? This is a really powerful way to describe the beginning and the journey of Amazon.
It's really a very simple and I think age-old idea about renewal and rebirth, and like every day is day 1. Every day you're deciding what you're going to do, and you are not trapped by what you were or who you were or any self-consistency. Self-consistency even can be a trap. And so day 1 thinking is kind of, we start fresh every day, and we get to make new decisions every day about invention, about customers, about how we're going to operate, what our even as deeply as what our principles are. We can go back to that. It turns out we don't change those very often, but we change them occasionally. And when we work on programs at Amazon, we often make a list of tenets, and the tenets are kind of, they're not principles. They're a little more tactical than principles, but it's kind of the main ideas that we want this program to embody, whatever those are. And one of the things that we do is we put, these are the tenets for this program, and then in parentheses, we always put, unless you know a better way.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea, unless you know a better way, is so important, because you never want to get trapped by dogma. You never want to get trapped by history. It doesn't mean you discard history or ignore it. There's so much value in what has worked in the past, but you can't be blindly following what you've done. And that's the heart of day 1. You're always starting fresh.
And to the question of how to fend off day 2, you said such a question can't have a simple answer, as you're saying. There will be many elements, multiple paths, and many traps. I don't know the whole answer, but I may know bits of it. Here's a starter pack of essentials. Maybe others come to mind. For day 1, defense. Customer obsession, a skeptical view of proxies, the eager adoption of external trends, and high-velocity decision-making. So we talked about high-velocity decision-making. That's more difficult than it sounds. So maybe you can pick one that stands out to you as you can comment on. Eager adoption of external trends, high-velocity decision-making, skeptical view of proxies. How do you fight off day 2?
Well, I'll talk about, because I think it's the one that is maybe in some ways the hardest to understand, is the skeptical view of proxies. One of the things that happens in business, probably anything that where you have an ongoing program and something is underway for a number of years, is you develop certain things that you're managing to. Like, let's say the typical case would be a metric. And that metric isn't the real underlying thing. And so, maybe the metric is efficiency metric around customer contacts per unit sold, or something. Like, if you sell 1 million units, how many customer contacts do you get? Or how many returns do you get? And so on and so on. And so what happens is a little bit of a kind of inertia sets in, where somebody a long time ago invented that metric. And they invented that metric. They decided we need to watch for, customer returns per unit sold as an important metric. But they had a reason why they chose that metric, the person who invented that metric and decided it was worth watching. And then fast forward 5 years, that metric is the proxy.
Mm-hmm. The proxy for truth, I guess.
The proxy for truth, the proxy for customer, let's say in this case, it's a proxy for customer happiness.
Yeah.
But that metric is not actually customer happiness. It's a proxy for customer happiness. The person who invented the metric understood that connection. 5 years later, a kind of inertia can set in, and you forget the truth behind why you were watching that metric in the first place. And the world shifts a little.
Yeah.
And now that proxy isn't as valuable as it used to be, or it's missing something. And you have to be on alert for that. You have to know, okay, I don't really care about this metric. I care about customer happiness. And this metric is worth putting energy into and following and improving and scrutinizing only in so much as it actually affects customer happiness. And so you got to constantly be on guard. And it's very, very common. This is a nuanced problem. It's very common, especially in large companies, that they are managing to metrics that they don't really understand. They don't really know why they exist. And the world may have shifted out from under them a little. And the metrics are no longer as relevant as they were when somebody 10 years earlier invented the metric.
That is a nuance, but that's a big problem, right?
It's a huge problem.
There's something so compelling to have a nice metric to try to optimize.
Yes. And by the way, you do need metrics.
Yes, you do.
You can't ignore them. You want them, but you just have to be constantly on guard. This is, a way to slip into day two thinking would be to manage your business to metrics that you don't really understand. And you're not really sure why they were invented in the first place. And you're not sure they're still as relevant as they used to be.
What does it take to be the guy or gal who brings up the point that this proxy might be outdated? I guess, what does it take to have a culture that enables that in the meeting? Because that's a very uncomfortable thing to bring up at a meeting. We all showed up here. It's a Friday.
This is you have just asked $1 million question. So this is what if I generalize what you're asking, you're talking in general about truth telling.
Yeah.
And we humans are not really truth-seeking animals. We are social animals.
Yeah, we are.
And, take you back in time 10,000 years and you're in a small village. If you go along to get along, you can survive. You can procreate. If you're the village truth teller, you might get clubbed to death in the middle of the night. Truths are often, they don't want to be heard because important truths can be uncomfortable. They can be awkward. They can be exhausting,
impolite.
Yes,
all that kind of stuff.
Challenging. Yeah. They can make people defensive, even if that's not the intent. But any high-performing organization, whether it's a sports team, a business, a political organization, an activist group, I don't care what it is, any high-performing organization has to have mechanisms and a culture that supports truth-telling. One of the things you have to do is you have to talk about that. And you have to talk about the fact that it takes energy to do that. And you have to talk to people. You have to remind people it's okay that it's uncomfortable. You have to literally tell people it's not what we're designed to do as humans. It's not really, it's kind of a side effect. We can do that. But it's not how we survive. We mostly survive by being social animals and being cordial and cooperative. And that's really important. And so there's science is all about truth telling. It's actually a very formal mechanism for trying to tell the truth. And even in science, you find that it's hard to tell the truth. Right? Even, you're supposed to have a hypothesis and test it and find data and reject the hypothesis and so on. It's not easy.
But even in science, there's like the senior scientists and the junior scientists.
Correct.
And then there's a hierarchy of humans where
It's somehow
seniority matters in the scientific process, which
and that's not true inside companies too. Yeah. And so you want to set up your culture so that the most junior person can overrule the most senior person if they have data. And that really is about trying to, there are little things you can do. So for example, in every meeting that I attend, I always speak last. And I know from experience that, if I speak first, even very strong-willed, highly intelligent, high judgment participants in that meeting will wonder, well, if Jeff thinks that, I came in this meeting thinking one thing, but maybe I'm not right. And so you can do little things like, if you're the most senior person in the room, go last. Let everybody else go first. In fact, ideally, let's try to have the most junior person go first, and the second, then try to go in order of seniority, so that you can hear everyone's opinion in a kind of unfiltered way. Because we really do. We actually literally change our opinions. If somebody who you really respect says something, it makes you change your mind a little.
So you're saying implicitly or explicitly give permission for people to have a strong opinion, that as long as it's backed by data.
Yes, and sometimes it can even, by the way, a lot of our most powerful truths turn out to be hunches. They turn out to be based on anecdotes.
Yeah.
They're intuition based, and sometimes you don't even have strong data. But you may know the person well enough to trust their judgment. You may feel yourself leaning in. It may resonate with a set of anecdotes you have, and then you may be able to say, something about that feels right. Let's go collect some data on that. Let's try to see if we can actually know whether it's right. But for now, let's not disregard it because it feels right. You can also fight inherent bias. There's an optimism bias. Like, if there are two interpretations of a new set of data, and one of them is happy and one of them is unhappy, it's a little dangerous to jump to the conclusion that the happy interpretation is right. You may want to sort of compensate for that human bias of looking for, trying to find the silver lining and say, look, that might be good, but I'm going to go with it's bad for now until we're sure. To seek truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and you have to get people's attention, and they have to buy into it, and they have to get energized around really fixing things. This is another really good and kind of deep question, because there are big things that are really important to manage, and then there are small things. Internally into Amazon, we call them paper cuts. So we're always working on the big things. Like, if you ask me, and most of the energy goes into the big things, as it should. So, and you can identify the big things, and I would encourage anybody, if anybody listening to this is an entrepreneur, has a small business, whatever, think about the things that are not going to change over 10 years. And those are probably the big things. So, like, I know in our retail business at Amazon, 10 years from now, customers are still going to want low prices. I know they're still going to want fast delivery. And I just know they're still going to want big selection. So it's impossible to imagine a scenario where 10 years from now, where a customer says, I love Amazon, I just wish the prices were a little higher. Or, I love Amazon, I just wish you delivered a little more slowly. So when you identify the big things, you can tell they're worth putting energy into because they're stable in time. Okay. But you're asking about something a little different, which is, in every customer experience, there are those big things. And by the way, it's astonishingly hard to focus even on just the big things. So even though they're obvious, they're really hard to focus on. But in addition to that, there are all these little tiny customer experience deficiencies. And we call those paper cuts. And we make long lists of them. And then we have dedicated teams that go fix paper cuts, because the teams working on the big issues never get to the paper cuts. They never work their way down the list to get to, they're working on big things, as they should, and as you want them to. And so you need special teams who are charged with fixing paper.
Do you think there will be a day when humans and robots, maybe Alexa, have a romantic relationship? Like in her.
Well, I mean, I think if you look at
brainstorming products here,
if you look at the spectrum of human variety and what people like, sexual variety.
Yes.
There are people who like everything. So the answer to your question has to be yes.
Okay.
I don't know.
I guess I'm asking.
I don't know
when.
how widespread that will be.
All right.
But it will happen.
I was just asking when. How do you achieve time where you can focus and truly think through problems?
I do little thinking retreats. So for this is not the only I can do that all day long. I'm very good at focusing. I'm very good at I don't keep to a strict schedule. Like my meetings often go longer than I plan for them to because I believe in wandering. My perfect meeting starts with a crisp document. So the document should be written with such clarity that it's like angels singing from on high. I like a crisp document and a messy meeting. And so the meeting is about like asking questions that nobody knows the answer to and trying to like wander your way to a solution. And because and that is when that happens just right, it makes all the other meetings worthwhile. It feels good. It has a kind of beauty to it. It has an aesthetic beauty to it, and you get real breakthroughs in meetings like that.
Can you actually describe the crisp document? Like this is one of the legendary aspects of Amazon, of the way you approach meetings. This is the 6-page memo. Maybe first describe the process of running a meeting with memos. And
meetings at Amazon and at Blue Origin are unusual. When we get when new people come in, like a new executive joins, they're a little taken aback sometimes because the typical meeting will start with a 6-page narratively structured memo, and we do study hall. For 30 minutes, we sit there silently together in the meeting and read. Take notes in the margins, and then we discuss. And the reason, by the way, we do study, you could say, I would like everybody to read these memos in advance, but the problem is people don't have time to do that. And they end up coming to the meeting having only skimmed the memo or maybe not read it at all, and they're trying to catch up. And they're also bluffing like they were in college, having pretended to do the reading.
Yeah, exactly.
It's better just to carve out the time for people.
And do it
so now
together.
We're all on the same page. We've all read the memo. And now we can have a really elevated discussion. And this is so much better from having a slideshow presentation, a PowerPoint presentation of some kind, where that has so many difficulties. But one of the problems is PowerPoint is really designed to persuade. It's kind of a sales tool. And internally, the last thing you want to do is sell. You're truth seeking. You're trying to find truth. And the other problem with PowerPoint is it's easy for the author and hard for the audience. And a memo is the opposite. It's hard to write a 6-page memo. A good 6-page memo might take 2 weeks to write. You have to write it, you have to rewrite it, you have to edit it, you have to talk to people about it. They have to poke holes in it for you. You write it again. It might take 2 weeks. So the author, it's really a very difficult job. But for the audience, it's much better. So you can read a half hour and there are little problems with PowerPoint presentations too. Senior executives interrupt with questions halfway through the presentation. That question's going to be answered on the next slide, but you never got there. Whereas if you read the whole memo in advance, I often write lots of questions that I have in the margins of these memos, and then I go cross them all out because by the time I get to the end of the memo, they've been answered. That's why I save all that time. You also get, if the person who's preparing the memo, we talked earlier about groupthink and, the fact that I go last in meetings and that you don't want, your ideas to kind of pollute the meeting prematurely. The author of the memo has kind of got to be very vulnerable. They got to put all their thoughts out there and they've got to go first, but that's great because it makes them really good. And you get to see their real ideas and you're not trampling on them accidentally in a big, PowerPoint presentation.
What's that feel like when you've authored a thing and then you're sitting there and everybody's reading your thing? You're like,
I think it's mostly terrifying.
Yeah. Like maybe in a good way.
I think it's
like a purifying.
I think it's terrifying in a productive way.
Yeah.
But I think it's emotionally a very nerve-wracking experience.
Is there art, science to the writing of the 6-page memo, or just writing in general to you?
It's really got to be a real memo. So it means, paragraphs have topic sentences, it's verbs and nouns. You can't. That's the other problem with PowerPoint presentations. They're often just bullet points, and you can hide a lot of sloppy thinking behind bullet points. When you have to write in complete sentences with narrative structure, it's really hard to hide sloppy thinking. So it forces the author to be at their best. And so they're getting somebody's really their best thinking. And then you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to tease that thinking out of the person. You've got it from the very beginning. So it really saves you time in the long run.
So that part is crisp, and then the rest is messy. Crisp document.
Yes, and you don't want to pretend that the discussion should be crisp.
Yeah.
There's, most meetings you're trying to solve a really hard problem. There's a different kind of meeting, which we call weekly business reviews or business reviews. They may be weekly or monthly or daily, whatever they are. But these business review meetings, that's usually for incremental improvement, and you're looking at a series of metrics. Every time it's the same metrics. Those meetings can be very efficient. They can start on time and end on time. Think longer term. Long-term thinking is a giant lever. You can literally solve problems if you think long-term that are impossible to solve if you think short-term. And we aren't really good at thinking long-term. It's not really, we're kind of, 5 years is a tough time frame for most institutions to think past. And we probably need to stretch that to 10 years and 15 years and 20 years and 25 years. And we'd do a better job for our children or our grandchildren if we could stretch those thinking